Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Upgrade Your Carbon Procurement Strategy, Building a High Integrity Carbon Portfolio. Thank you to our sponsor, A New Climate, for bringing this content to life today. I'm Katie Ryan, VP of Sustainability here at Scoop, and I am so excited to welcome everybody here today. Before we get started, I'm just going to do a couple things to make sure that you get the most out of this webinar. The first piece is just noticing the couple of things along the toolbar on the bottom. The Q&A button there is where you can post questions that you might have for a speaker. So you can post the question and the speaker that you want to answer it. We'll get all of those questions following the webinar. So if there's anything that you do want answered, please put it in there. If it doesn't make sense to answer it live, we can always, of course, get back to you. So never too many questions to put there in that Q&A. The chat is for your fellow attendees, so you can share where you're from and what you're working on in that chat to kind of get the feel of being in the room. Um, we'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar, so you can always come back and revisit the pieces that were the most meaningful and important to you, and of course share those with your coworkers and partners as you're trying to make progress on the goals that we all have around decarbonization. I think those are my major things. You should be pretty familiar with this platform because it is a Zoom platform. If there's anything we can answer for you in the meantime, again, put it in the chat if it's a question to the attendees at large or the Q&A to our speakers. And with that, I would love to introduce you to the content that we're covering today. I'm so glad that we actually get to talk about this today because there have been so many changes and movements in the voluntary carbon markets. We're talking about changes in supply, we're talking about removals and avoidance, and there's a real opportunity now for organizations to have more of a strategic, intentional approach to using carbon markets and tools as a part of their overall decarbonization efforts, especially if you have aggressive net zero goals. So we'll start this conversation by looking at the voluntary market, both highlights from ANU and the market in general, including portfolio frameworks, considerations, and approaches. We'll get into how carbon portfolios actually play out in corporate strategies by talking to two folks who are managing the sustainability efforts in their organizations at DocuSign and McKinsey. And with that, I would love to introduce you to our speakers. You'll see their like real life faces up there and then also their pictures here. We'll start with Brendan Maloney, Head of Sustainability at DocuSign, fresh off of San Francisco Climate Week, calling in from Denver. You're going to notice a through line of mountain towns here. So if you want to drop into the chat your favorite mountain town, I'm sure we'll have some winners in there. Brendan has, over 10 years of experience working on sustainability teams, obviously at DocuSign, but also with background working in electronics and healthcare, mostly focused on supply chain decarbonization. And now, of course, running a pretty robust carbon procurement strategy for DocuSign. Let's also talk about Lauren Michek, Senior Category Manager, Environment at McKinsey. Lauren's got 10 years working in carbon offsets, including research and development of new and innovative carbon offsets. McKinsey also just released their latest sustainability report on their emissions reductions efforts. And they got to have the pleasure of writing one of those reports that is like, hey, we not only met but exceeded our 2025 emissions reduction targets. So congratulations. And I know McKinsey's also set a really ambitious net zero by 2050 goal as well. So we'll be digging into that a little bit more. And then, of course, Lizzie Aldrich, VP of Business Development over here at ANU. Lizzie heads the voluntary carbon markets there at ANU and has worked in carbon markets since 2004 across project development policy, corporate climate strategy. She's got an undergrad, master's, and PhD in environmental studies, so she can go as deep as you want into this important topic for today. And with that, I'd love to just kick this conversation off. Lizzie, why don't you take the reins?
Thanks so much, Katie. And I hail from Truckee, California, another mountain town near Tahoe. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to talk a little bit today about how Anu works with our clients to develop portfolios of offsets and removals and some of the considerations that go into that. So just quickly, who is Anu? Anu is a carbon offset and removal project developer. We've been around since 2001, so we celebrate 25 years this spring. And we've focused our development efforts on North America, but we're also expanding into Europe. So we work in biofuel markets across the US as well as in Germany. And we do also work in the California and Alberta compliance markets, developing projects in those markets as well. This is a slide just showing a few highlights from our carbon program and our voluntary sales. As of late, we've been a supplier to Microsoft for several years, and we have some great partnerships with some of our clients that extend out for 10-year offtakes. And we can go for 10, even 20-year offtakes with some of our clients. And some of our other, some folks who have also purchased Anu credits, Google, Disney, Nestle, JP Morgan, Prologis, a really great set of companies that we love working with. So looking at why do some of our clients engage in 10 and even longer offtakes, 10-year and longer offtakes with us, they're really seeing that the credit demand is increasing into the future. And this is a graph from Solvera's market value projections. And what is driving this growth is really not only these corporate net zero targets that many companies and some that are on the line today have, but also the Paris Agreement, whereby credits can get traded internationally to meet the targets of countries under the Paris Agreement, and also CORSIA, which is an international aviation market, and voluntary credits are fungible within that compliance market. So we're really seeing multiple drivers of demand for these voluntary credits going out into the future, which we believe is going to drive up price and also unless we're able to ramp up to meet that, would create a shortage of credits. And so when we work with clients, they are thinking about a whole host of things as they approach this. What type of project might they want? What kind of budget in terms of dollars per removal or reduction do they have to apply towards it? What kind of co-benefits come along with it? Where is it located? Is that aligned with their headquarters? And then how does that credit fit within frameworks that they may have as an organization that they're a part of, like SBTI? And how do ratings agencies consider that project? So I'm just going to walk through each of these briefly. So over the last about 6 years, there's really been a bifurcation in the types of offsets and removals out there. And so we now think about these credits not just as homogenous, but they've been bifurcated into two camps: reductions and removals. And so reductions are projects that avoid emissions that otherwise would have gone into the atmosphere. And removals are projects that draw down CO2 out of the atmosphere. And so some examples of tech-based reductions would be landfill gas that otherwise would go into the atmosphere. Instead, it's getting captured and destroyed through a flare, boiler, microturbine, so that that's not having the atmospheric effects of that methane. On the nature-based side, that would be keeping trees that in the business as usual scenario would be cut down, keeping those standing in the ground. And then on the removal side, a few examples of nature-based removals would be planting trees, allowing them to photosynthesize and draw down CO2 out of the atmosphere, adding soil amendments to crops that are going to draw down CO2 out of the atmosphere. And on the tech-based side, biochar, bio-CCS, direct air capture. So a whole host of different project types that really have different price points associated with them. So on this slide, you can see some of those price points really ranging from, US hydrofluorocarbons for hydrochlorocarbon recycling from $1.90 all the way up to direct air capture at $375 per metric ton. So really widespread in the pricing. This is also a function of the vintage and the volume purchased as well. So when we work with clients, sometimes what we do is we put together a blended portfolio because they may want to support a variety of project types. Some are more expensive and some are less expensive, and that can get them to an average price that's consistent with their budget. The next consideration are co-benefits. So a lot of clients are wondering, what are they getting for their purchase in addition to 1 metric ton of reduction or removal? And so for forestry projects, for example, there are a host of benefits to from wildlife preservation, watershed protection, nutrient cycling, recreation. And this is actually some photos from our Francis Beidler project in South Carolina, where researchers are tagging songbirds to track their migration. And a Boy Scout troop has put in some bridges to increase recreation on the property. So there's certainly projects that have differing co-benefits, and we work with clients to find those that fit with the mission, vision, and values of their company. Clients are also looking at, okay, what do I get for my purchase? And how does it fit within a framework that my company may be a part of? And there's a whole host of frameworks out there. But the two I want to talk about briefly are those that are bolded on this slide that have had a few updates recently. So the ICVCM is a group that's evaluating methodologies, and they're looking at which methodologies have the most rigor and are the most robust. And for those methodologies, they're applying a core carbon principle label, a CCP label. And we are finding that clients are coming to us requesting credits that have a CCP label. This is an ongoing process. This group is evaluating methodologies over time. They can't do them all at once. And so CCP labels are being awarded to methodologies as the group has a chance to review them. The next is the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and this is probably familiar to corporates on this line. This is guidance for corporates that are trying to reduce their emissions over time, and some have net zero targets under this standard. And some late breaking news, I heard today that the SBTI will come out with their net zero 2 guidance on June 22nd of this year. So we're really excited and can't wait to see that, because for the first time in the draft of this guidance, SBTI has actually awarded recognition to companies that take responsibility for their ongoing emissions through purchase of credits, both reduction and removal credits. Will get this recognition under SBTI if the final is the same as the draft. So really looking forward to that, and really should help provide more of a driver for companies to procure these credits. And then lastly, companies are thinking about how is what they purchase rated. So over the last 5 years, ratings agencies have popped up, and these are looking not at methodologies, but individual projects. And they're rating and reviewing projects on a scale from AAA to D. There are a host of them out there. The 3 shown on this slide are the 3 that have emerged as the most widely known. Their ratings are made public, but to get the specific report for why they may have rated a project as they did, you have to be a member subscriber. And I will say they are looking at a variety of things, from additionality to permanence to co-benefits, and they weight them differently. So you may see one project that's rated different based on the individual rating agency that has given it the rating. So certainly an emerging area, and one that some of our clients are looking at closely and requesting projects that have a certain rating. So I just want to briefly give a few comments on what a recommendation for a portfolio may be. So when we have clients come to us, we encourage them to diversify. So if they're looking at a long-term offtake, that really helps, because the more projects you may have in a portfolio, the lower the risk of delivery from any one of those projects. And also we encourage them to evolve the portfolio over time. So currently, a combination of reductions and removals can really meet that price point that most of our clients are looking to meet. And we encourage them to shift more towards a removals-based portfolio over time. And within those removals, we know that nature-based removals are available at a wide scale, commercially viable right now. So we encourage them to use what we have. And then as permanent removals like direct air capture become more commercialized, and more financially viable, we encourage clients to shift more towards some of those tech-based removals over time. And of course, considering the relevant guidance that their company may be looking to comply with. So this is what that might look like. And you can see the amount of removals and reductions that are procured over time is decreasing. And that's because we assume that that corporate's taking internal actions to reduce their emissions within their fence line. Therefore, the number of instruments they procure is decreasing over time, but weighted more towards reductions at the beginning and then increasing amounts of removals over time. And those removals really going from more nature-based to a more balanced tech and nature-based over time. And last, I just want to mention that we do work with a lot of clients who are facing struggles because they have 2030 net zero targets and they know that they need to meet them, but they don't have the budget right now to meet them. So they really face this dilemma. And so we have created a program called Carbon Bridge, which is a solution to this, which allows those corporates to take action and take title to credits now, and thereby helping to meet those targets that are coming up in the future and not be price takers in 2029 when we think those prices are really going to escalate significantly. And they are able to do so with deferring payment even out to up to 5 years. So taking title to that asset gets transferred into the client's account, but they're able to defer payment up to 5 years when they will have that budget to be able to address those emissions. And this is what it kind of looks like. So if you're a corporate, you have a few options for your 2030 target. You can do nothing now and just be a price taker in 2029. You could do a spot purchase now and begin to build up a portfolio of credits to meet that target, but you have to have a budget to do so. You could do a forward offtake where you're not responsible for paying for those credits until they're issued in the future, but there's some risk that perhaps that project you do a forward offtake from does not actually deliver. Or you can engage in Carbon Bridge, which is uniquely offered through Anu, and you have deferred payment, but you get those credits immediately and you're able to build up your supply of credits towards your 2030 targets now. And so just a few reasons why that's important. You're able to really look at what are your greenhouse gas emissions now? So taking action now so you know what you have to address. You gain experience with credit procurement, suppliers, contracts, setting up registry accounts, communicating about your purchase. You're able to take action before it becomes urgent and you become in a rush to do it. And we see that credit prices are expected to rise. So you're able to get ahead of that if you take action now. And also, there's this thought that if you do engage now, you could influence future markets and policy, even getting early action in what may be a federal regime in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brendan, and we can hear from a corporate who's actually facing these challenges and what they're doing now.
Can I interrupt, Brendan, before you start? Lizzie, I had one follow-up question for you, inspired by a Q&A from the audience. We didn't talk about assurance or audits. Do you have like a minute on how that plays into companies selecting their carbon portfolio strategy?
Sure. Well, within the realm of carbon offset and removal project development, we really think about audits by third-party verifiers, which is part of the process of getting a credit issued. And so we do the calculations from start to finish of what is being quantified, how's it quantified, and then we have a third-party auditor that comes out on site to review and check our calculations. And there's typically a 2 to 3 month kind of Q&A period because they're going through thousands of line items of calculations. And then once all of those are resolved, that then goes to the standards body and they do a double review. So they then review both the auditor's work and our work. And if they're in agreement, and that's about a 4 to 6 week Q&A period. And if that is resolved, the credits are then successfully issued. So that's what in our world that auditing looks like. I think that probably Lauren and Brendan could speak more to the auditing of their actual emissions from an inventory perspective. But in our carbon offset project development world, that's what third-party auditing means to us.
Thank you. That's just what I wanted to know. Thanks, Lizzie. Okay, over to you, Brendan. Let's hear about what's happening at DocuSign.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, so at DocuSign, sustainability has always been a core value. It's something that from the start and we've always kind of done. And so it all started with paper savings numbers. You're signing an electronic document, you're saving paper over time. And so primarily that's how we've spoken about sustainability. It's helping our clients be more efficient, making sure that they're signing agreements. I talked to Alex Honnold the other week in San Francisco, and he signs his DocuSigns on the side of a cliff. So I think like the ability to sign anywhere and have that paperless signature is huge for the environment. And so we use a life cycle assessment and calculate everyone's paper savings numbers over time. And so we've had over 149 billion sheets of paper saved. And if you were to stack that high, it'd be, I think, around 9,400 miles high. So you'd be well out of the atmosphere, and I think it would wrap the world if you put those sheets of paper end to end over 1,000 times. And so it's a big impact over time that we've had, and now it's kind of become a standard process where everyone's signing agreements electronically for the most part. And so we've had a shift as an organization, and I think we originally started out with this paper savings piece, and our carbon portfolio followed this. So like we purchase forestry credits to align with this mission. And so now shifting towards like an AI focused company and that whole agreement management system, our focus for carbon credits has changed a little bit as well. And so we're now looking at the whole entire ecosystem of an agreement from the start phase to the end phase, and how are we supporting our customers, utilizing things like our AI tools to make their lives a lot more efficient and easier when it comes to an agreement process. Carbon offtake projects are really uh, tough agreements to create. How can we make that process easier for people? And so we're building out our own AI tools. We've digested over 200 million agreements into our AI tool. And we've seen over a 50 times more efficiency in our LLM versus like the primary LLMs like ChatGPT or something like that for agreement workflows. Though 200 mil or over 200 million agreements, some of those are carbon credits, some of those are renewable energy. And so we want to make sure that we're making everyone's contracting process easier, especially around sustainability and weaving that in. And part of this is trust. And so that's how our carbon credit procurement process has really changed. It's our customers are trusting us with these super critical agreements that might have all their banking information. It might have all this critical information. And so trust is huge. And so now with our carbon credit procurement strategy, we're really focused on that integrity piece and that trust piece. We want to make sure that what we're purchasing also aligns with that trust, and we're not, purchase going above and beyond, but we're really focused on that quality over quantity. And so we just released our impact report a few weeks ago. So I go take a look at that. We have a larger disclosure on what our carbon portfolio is, that links out in there. We also have more information on our carbon footprint, our science-based targets, and other initiatives that we have going on. But a few highlights is we saw a 56% reduction in our emissions, 94% reduction in our cloud emissions, switching methodologies. And so I think a really good example is we have a carbon neutral certification as part of our organization, and as we purchase carbon credits. With that big of a swing in uh, our overall carbon footprint, our commitment to carbon credits could really swing year to year. And so I think what is really interesting is the carbon accounting piece with the carbon credit procurement, making sure that the two are aligned. And with seeing such a big shift in our carbon emissions, we want to make sure that our budgets align and then also that procurement aligns. So thinking long term, thinking how these shifts might happen. Signing up for something like a net zero goal or purchasing 100% of your footprint can be really a liability for a sustainability team. And so we try to be really pragmatic in how we purchase credits and things like that. We're also seeing, also saw a big shift as we migrate our data over to Microsoft Azure. And so how do we align with Microsoft's sustainability procurement strategy? A news partnered with them on credits. We want to partner with our partners, and so that alignment is really critical for how we communicate to our customers, how we work with partners. And so I think thinking holistically about our carbon credit strategy and how we're partnering with people, I think is really, really important. Things like business travel is 18% of our footprint. Are we looking at sustainable aviation fuel or reduction around that in that way? And then so sort of on to a little bit more about our carbon credit portfolio. So this is a direct picture from our impact report. And again, please go take a look at it. But we're currently carbon neutral certified, and we're looking to shift away from the carbon neutral certification towards more of a quality standard. And so we're looking at the voluntary carbon market initiative as kind of our guidepost of what's that quality standard? How do we follow? How do we align with that initiative as we build out our portfolio and as we reach towards our net zero goals? And so what we're doing is really focused on the quality. So what is that quality? Working with our procurement partner for this year, Patch, of like, how are we evaluating all these different projects? What are we looking at? Are these CCP labeled projects? And then how are we evaluating and how are we figuring out that quality piece, especially around trust around our portfolio. And so we have one example in here from a new in our report from the Nez Quality Land Trust around this Rainier Gateway project. And so we chose a project that was close to actually DocuSign was founded in Washington in Seattle. And so we wanted a project close to our Seattle office for this report, I reached out to them for updated logos, and they were so excited for us to be a part of this and be highlighting this project. And I think it goes back to, having those projects that if you phone someone up for a logo and they're super excited, this is a forest within our ecosystem as DocuSign having an office there. And highlighting like the really great work that these people are doing. It's not just a credit we purchased off of a platform, but it's an actual forest and people that we're helping to support. And so for us, that's really what it comes down to is how are we telling that story? We might even do a tour with our employees in the Seattle area to go visit this forest. But I think having that connection is really, really important. So as we grow our portfolio and as we kind of move away from different, forestry projects and things like that, I think for us, that's, how we really want to look at things. So I will pass it on over to Lauren to talk more about McKinsey's purview.
I mean, I can't help but insert myself between all of you. Everything you're saying is so interesting. And again, there will be time for Q&A at the end, so keep your questions coming in the Q&A chat. Um, Brendan, I'm so glad that you shared that communicating about your portfolio strategy is like an intentional part of your strategy, and even being able to share the transition that DocuSign is making from a carbon neutral claim to net zero, just like spelled out so simply in that piece of your report. I mean, I'm a comms junkie, so that kind of stuff just like immediately like makes fireworks go off for me. But um, the way that DocuSign spelled that out is just so clear and brings people along. Um, anyway, just I love seeing examples that people can steal from. Wanted to call that out.
Well, thank
Uh,
you.
and as somebody who knows about offsetting their employee travel emissions, I feel like, Lauren, you must spend so much of your time working that out as you do the sustainability work at McKinsey. So, yeah, I'd love to hear from you, please.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Brandon. Um, So McKinsey is on quite the journey for sustainability. We have an SBTI validated net 2050 net zero goal, which Katie alluded to. And that includes cutting a 90% reduction in our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2050, as well as a 97% reduction in business travel per FTE by 2050. And this is, of course, a journey. So in 2023, we introduced an internal carbon fee, which we use to fund all of our sustainable procurement, particularly around carbon offsets, renewable electricity, and SAF. And that was also the first year we bought sustainable aviation fuel. We've been buying offsets year over year for some time now as well. And as Katie also alluded to, 2025 was a really big year for us. We had a near-term target of 25% reduction in our scope 1 and 2 emissions, 35% reduction in business travel per FTE, and that's all benchmarked against 2019. And as Katie mentioned, we really exceeded those goals, which we're really excited to share. We actually ended up cutting our, I kind of looked to make sure I get the numbers right, cutting our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 70%. And then we cut our travel emissions per FTE by 50%. So that's something that we've been really excited to share recently. We also have a goal to switch to 100% removals by 2030, and we're scaling that up over time. Now, goals are great, but the how is hard. And in order to do that, we've really zoomed in on a three-pronged approach. So the first is cut, which, as everyone on this call I think knows, the first and most important thing you can do is reduce your emissions first before turning to other instruments. And for us, that means being intentional in our travel, which is very critical to how we serve our clients and our business model. But thinking about things like local staffing or optimizing our travel paths to make sure that we are you know, using thought when we make those travel decisions. We also try to buy things like sustainable aviation fuel and renewable electricity to reduce those emissions directly within our supply chain. Now, after that, we then look to compensate our remaining emissions. So every year we procure 100% of carbon credits to cover our emissions profile after SAF and renewable electricity. And as I mentioned, we're shifting to 100% removals of that amount by 2030. And as I mentioned, that's funded by our internal carbon fee, which for 2026 is $62 per ton. Now, finally, there's also the catalyzed portion. I can buy carbon credits today that I'm really excited about, but I think everyone knows that there's also this next generation of products that really needs help to get going in the market. So we think about next generation durable carbon removals. We think about some of the nature-based removal products that are reforestation that have really high upfront costs. So we support the market through our work with coalitions, as well as other partners to grow. And again, I guess we're three-pronging to three-pronging. We like three today here at McKinsey. When we're looking at the compensation approach specifically, we look at it through three different avenues of how we procure these credits. So the first is, I mentioned, these long-term offtake agreements. So this is committing to purchase products today for delivery into the future out to 2030 and beyond. And we do that bilaterally as well as with our coalitions. So we're part of a few advanced market commitments or AMCs where we purchase alongside other similarly positioned buyers to really catalyze the market. Some example of that is the Frontier Coalition, Symbiosis Coalition, and then we're also participating with the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Buyers Alliance, which is a bit of a mouthful, to support SAF. And we also, at the end of the day, make a number of in-year purchases to support our needs because we can only forward offtake so much, especially since we only started doing that a few years ago. And then to meet our 100% compensation commitment each year, we also purchase carbon offsets on the spot market. Now, since we're chatting about spot purchases, I want to share a little bit about how we do that since I think it's probably most relevant to our audience today. So the general view, as Brendan mentioned, is quality is everything, right? So we always go in with a view of what we think quality is as a company. We set up scorecards that look at key project criteria like additionality, rigor of the quantification, permanence, and other similar products. And we score all those products against those criteria. Also includes things like price, co-benefits, as well as table stakes and elimination criteria like no net harm and making sure we're working with good actors in the market. We also leverage third-party diligence providers for more technical components. I like to say I can be Jill of all trades, but master of none, right? As much as I've been in this market for many years, I'm not a forester. I don't have a forestry PhD. So we find folks that have that expertise to support us in those analyses. And then we also stay on top of the latest guidance, including efforts like CCP, VCMI, and other, how SBTI is listing out their guidance for these types of products to help support and guide our buying principles. At the end of the day, it's really a balance against, what you're looking to do. So a portion of our portfolio is that catalytic, perhaps a little higher delivery risk, perhaps more on the bleeding edge of science projects. And then the other ones, really tried and true products that we know are going to deliver, we know are high quality, and we know we're excited to have in our portfolio as well. And that's all I had today for our carbon strategy. I'll pass it over to the Q&A, I think.
Okay, well, Lauren, you think that's all you have, but I
Yeah.
have a question for you on
Yes.
this slide right here. Um,
Yeah.
I'm sure this is not such a simple answer, but do are all three of these pieces something that you do equally, or you tend to like lean on one more than the other year by year? Like, yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question. Um, at the moment, most of our procurement does happen on the spot market. We were scaling in more long-term procurement over time. So the bilateral agreements and the agreements through the advanced market commitments. And we also, I can't share the exact numbers, but we do have a view on, for example, how much of our portfolio we want to have locked in by, for example, 2030. And when we make that decision, it's a bit of a balance of how do we make sure we're buying high quality products, locking them in if the market might be scarce, locking in our price. But also, as Brendan mentioned, emissions profiles can change over time. And you have to be able to think about those swings and what you might have in your emissions profile in 2030, as well as things like delivery risk, where we've seen in the market that some of these newer products, we can sign a long-term agreement, but it won't follow through. So it's a bit of an art and a science there.
Thank you. That I imagine that is a lot of people's approach. Is like that mix of art and science. I feel like that's what keeps the work interesting, right?
Oh, definitely.
Um, well, then I'd love to jump into the Q&A unless the three of you have a question for each other based on this. Okay, great. Um, Maybe we'll give some gratitude to the folks asking Q&A in the chat with a couple of earlier questions we got. Um, I'd like to start with the one about the taking on risk. So how to think about the financing gap between projects that need more upfront capital in order to be developed. Lizzie, do you want to take the perspective first from the developer side?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. That's a great question, and it's one that has evolved recently. Folks who are tracking these markets may have seen that some really interesting structures with Microsoft as the off-taker for a long-term offtake from a project has allowed financing partner, in some cases JP Morgan, to come in and finance the upfront capital cost of a project. And so I think that's a really neat structure. If you can identify a long-term off-taker that is committed to purchase the credits and has a contract to do so, they're a credit-worthy counterparty, then you can have a financial institution come in and award a loan based on that offtake agreement that can help projects get off the ground that may be pre-PDD. So in the really initial phases of their development. So that's one opportunity. We do find that sometimes this can be hard to arrange in terms of the timing of when buyers need those credits and when the project may be at that early stage. But buyers do tend to love those because they feel as though they're highly additional. They're happening because of the investment going into the project. But I would just say that's been a really successful model for a few developers as of late.
Can I double click on the Microsoft example? Because I love watching what Microsoft does in this space. I mean, every time they make an announcement, I'm like, wow, that's such a great idea. Like, thank you for taking that on. And there's very few organizations who are like Microsoft and can pair with somebody who's like a JP Morgan. Like I hear about this at our events all the time, which is like amazing to see what like a Microsoft can do. I am not a Microsoft. I do not have that budget. So when I talk to an investor or I talk to a project developer, the prices they're quoting me are like so far off of my budget. Um, Lizzie, do you have any examples of smaller
Mhm.
partnerships?
Well, we have done a large partnership, and this is not a small company, but with Total Energies for long tenure offtake. So that's an example. Another would be DTE Energy. We have done tenure offtakes from our Michigan Big Wild project with them. And so there are certainly other buyers out on the marketplace that are making large buying commitments and doing so for long-term offtake. And so while Microsoft has been the elephant in the room, and I realize there's been quite a splash with their recent pause on their removals program, they're not the only one out there. And so there are others. And I do think that this ability to do a long-term offtake, which a lot of these arrangements where you bring in a financing partner are built on, are a really great structure given what we think the credit price and what most analysts out there think credit prices are going to do. By engaging in that long-term offtake, you're locking in price now. And while there's a modest escalator, it's much more modest than what most analysts think the credit price will do into the future.
If we could hold on to that crystal ball a little bit longer, I was curious, and maybe this is a question that I'll go to Brendan and Lauren with as well, on how are you looking at your portfolio strategy with like what might be coming or leaving for federal incentives? Like, do you think about how, like, do you have a couple of different forecasts that are 5 years out and you try to find something in the middle, or how do you think about what might happen if we have a more renewable focused federal incentive program versus a less renewable incentive program? Brendan, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can jump. We don't have that sophisticated, and I don't think most folks do. I think it depends on how you finance or how you pay for credit. I mean, we pay for it out of an annual budget, and so for us, it's hard to project, will that budget swing or will that budget move around? So we're trying to get more sophisticated with our finance team of looking at long-term offtake projects, looking at scaling our budget based off of, different things that might be going on. I do think we do have an internal carbon price that we have in the back of our mind, and we try to work on that curve of like still having that quality threshold, but if we can save money in a way on that internal carbon price, utilizing the markets, how are we doing that? But not too sophisticated on outward projections of if things were to change in the market, but hopefully we'll get there.
Lauren, how does that compare to what you're doing at McKinsey?
Yeah, I can share. I mean, we do have a view on long-term pricing as well as some projections that we develop as well as look into what's happening in the market. And I think the way we ultimately have to balance it is similar to what I was mentioning before, is there's a bit of a trade-off between the long-term offtake locking the price in, as well as what the future might hold in terms of higher or lower prices. And there's some contracting considerations you can put in place. For example, we want to make sure we support our partners if there is a big policy change that substantially changes their economics. But at the same time, when we do the longer term offtakes, it is because we want to have some price certainty. So when we make those decisions, we have to kind of balance what do we think the risk is that the price will go up and we want to lock it in now, or that there's going to be perhaps oversupply and plentiful product and lower prices over time. And it is a bit hard to hold that crystal ball. So to as others have mentioned, having that diversified portfolio where you really think about what your perception of the future might be, as well as where your risk appetite is to design that strategy long term.
Thank you. Um, Staying on the pricing piece, Lizzie, I'd love to look at another question from one of our beloved attendees about that deferred payment option. We just were talking a little bit about pricing and how do you keep that in your budget. Can you share a little bit more about on the deferred payment option that you were talking about through Anu? Like who's taking the financial responsibility, whose balance sheet covers the credits?
Yeah, thanks. So this is, I should mention, an option we only do with credit-worthy counterparties. So there's certainly an important credit check done because we want to make sure if we're delivering credits and not receiving payment for 5 years, that that contract will hold and we will receive the payment in 5 years. But Anu is able to hold that because we are majority owned by the TPG Rise Climate Fund, which is private equity. And so we're not a bootstrapping project developer. We have a 25-year history. We have strong financial backing. And for us, we really want to help those corporates meet their goals. We want to make sure that they're taking action and not deferring action. And that's important for the situation we're in, for the atmosphere, for the climate. And as long as they're a credit-worthy counterparty, we're able to defer that and keep that on our books until we receive that payment. And so really, really a creative structure that is new. I haven't heard of anyone else offering that on the marketplace. And hopefully will be useful for those clients that have those 2030 targets and just right now are a little hamstrung by their budgets.
I'd like to go back to a conversation about ratings and internal scorecards. Lauren, you mentioned that McKinsey has kind of like this internal scorecard approach where you have a set of criteria that you're measuring each one against. And then Lizzie had brought up, like, hey, here are the different rating agencies and how they rate projects. So how do you look at like do those rating agency measurements play into your decisions, or are you like solely focused on the internal scorecard and ratings agencies are for somebody else to worry about?
Yeah, we consider both. I think we consider the rating agencies hold a lot of expertise that can support our decision making. So it's not that we would, specifically take a rating and say, okay, I'll buy anything that's A rated, no problem, no future consideration. We love high rated projects. We appreciate the analyses behind it. We'll take a closer look at those analyses perhaps, and then think about how that fits into our own risk tolerance and our own view on the different quality criteria, because we might have a slightly different view than one of the rating agencies has, to see how it fits. So I would say it's a great resource in terms of expertise. As I mentioned, we don't have everything, or I personally don't have everything in my house and brain to do. So thinking about how those smart folks have looked at it is a way that enhances our own due diligence.
Maybe we could switch to some lessons learned as you've all been a part of this market for a while. Lizzie, maybe we'll start with you on maybe mistakes you have seen companies make when they start building a carbon portfolio. Brendan, I knew like managing this portfolio is like a learning and doing process for DocuSign. So maybe we'll start with Lizzie and then hear from Brendan.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I think the biggest mistake would just be to sit on the sidelines, truthfully, to not engage at all. And I will say that having been in these markets, as you mentioned, Katie, since 2004, this is an evolution. And a lot of people throw out the Wild West, but I don't really like that analogy because these markets have been around and they have evolved. And just like our iPhones, we don't have version 1.0. We have the latest version because it's what runs the software. These markets are evolving and have new iterations of methodologies that are based on current economics as well as current satellite imagery and other technology that we have available now and we may not have had 5 years ago. And so I think that's really important because as you look at folks who may have purchased a credit in the past that maybe is not on the market now, think it's easy to just lay blame, but in reality that may have been a good choice for the time when they were doing that. Now, as people are constructing portfolios, what I would recommend is that they do take a look at what are the differences in the methodologies? Are there important differences? Do they, as a company, want to use the latest version of the methodology? And I would encourage that. But at the same time, older credits are also quite valuable. If you think about the time value of carbon in the atmosphere, The pro formas that were created based on those early credits were depending on carbon revenues from those projects. And so those projects were additional at the time in which they were implemented. And so I really do think, there's a trend in the market towards the latest vintage, towards the latest methodology. And I see that and I recognize that. I do think it's important. But at the same time, I do think, incorporating older credits is not necessarily a bad thing because it's rewarding the early actors in the market who really took a risk on this carbon finance. And at the time when they did so, they were constructing a project based on the carbon revenues expected over the full lifetime of the project, not just the first few years of it. And so I would say the biggest mistake would just be to not engage at all. So jump in and let's not wait because the atmosphere cannot wait.
I like that because it's like let's try to put to the side the old ways of thinking, but still look at like the vintage of the credit. So transfer your like old thinking desires to like how long and the impacts of that project. That's great. Thank you. Brendan, yeah, how have you continued to like tweak and learn about the portfolio that you're building?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think, the volume over like if you have a volume number but don't have a quality metric, it really can be a big mistake. And so I think having that quality lens or something that you're basing the quality of your credits on is a really important thing to do. And then I would say another one is as humans, we look at price and we say like the more expensive thing is the better thing in a way, like a expensive handbag is better than the non-expensive. And so I think again, having that quality lens of like something that's cheaper could be as good a quality or it just depends. And so I think having more knowledge, experts in the room in that quality piece, you may pay for a really expensive credit, but it could be the same as, a less expensive. And then I would say the third one is just um, really just focus in on like the data behind and what other people are doing. So I think a lot of times people like follow what I'm doing or whatever. I think having your own point of view and own, portfolio, I think makes a lot of sense. So don't be afraid to kind of go out, put yourself out there.
That's great. Lauren, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say the number of credits or the different types of projects in the market can be a bit overwhelming, right? There's geographies, there's project type, removal, avoidance, right? And I think it can be a challenge if you go in without, a clear vision of what you're solving for. So, are you looking for something in your supply chain that kind of directly involves with your own operations? Are you looking for something geographically aligned with where your headquarters is or where you have offices? Are you looking to spur something that's really new and innovative and maybe needs that extra help? Or are you looking for something that, fits a cause that's really important to you, like human health or biodiversity? I think going in with a couple ideas of what's important to you beyond just cutting greenhouse gas emissions, because there's a lot of ways to do that, will really help you pick products that are aligned with your company's values and then also, hopefully share with leadership and share with your colleagues why this is important beyond just the somewhat intangible like greenhouse gas number that folks hopefully care about, but having something a little bonus there is always really nice. On top of quality, quality is always everything first, but next, after that, align with your values.
Um, that's so great. I feel like that for sure is a through line of today's content is like quality. You just
Table
can't
stakes.
sacrifice
It's
that. Yeah,
table
yeah,
stakes these days.
that's right.
Yeah.
Um, we have a few minutes left, and gosh, there's so many more things I could cover. We could go for another hour. I wanted to end on like a green flag, red flag, yellow flag question because we've talked a lot about trust. Like Brendan, you had that great example of like, oh, they're so excited to send me their logo. Like that's a lovely like checkbox if you're looking for like who to trust and be confident in the folks that you backed. Do you have any like green flag, yellow flag, red flags things for folks to look out for as they look at suppliers, developers, partners in this work? Um, Lauren, do you want to go
Yeah,
first
sure.
and then we'll go
Yeah,
Brendan,
I
Lizzie?
think
Yeah.
sure, yeah. Transparency, right, is the green flag. I think folks that are willing to openly share information, maybe willing to host you at the project site, um, really clear data and methodology, I think is the biggest green flag. Then of course the inverse is if the data aren't clear, if it's hard to, get in touch, those things become the red flag. That being said, of course, if you're working in regions that are a little tougher to navigate, you have to keep that in mind, of course. But overall, transparency, I think, is an important green flag.
Ooh, that's a good one. Brendan, can you top that?
Oh gosh, for green flag, I, for me, it's all relationship based. So, the Anu project I went to college with some folks at Anu, and so we started that conversation early, and I had a relationship with, the team through college. And so I think it kind of goes back to that trust piece, but I think just having that overall like relationship and hearing from those, the land trust and them being so excited, I think it just builds that trust piece, but also that relationship, which I think is just a big part of what we're doing. It's not just selling something, it's a whole trust and relationship behind it.
Sure, that makes sense. You would want them to call you if something was changing with the project or something was like great or something. Get that. Lizzie, close us out.
Okay, well, it's a little hard since I am the project developer, but I'll just say from my perspective and having been in this for a very long time, I loved Lauren's comments about being able to have the transparency and go visit the project site and have it be tangible. And we at Anu have really focused our project development on the US and Canada. We're expanding into Europe. We've chosen those countries very intentionally where boundaries are respected, the rule of law is well understood, and that has helped us to really deliver on contracts out into the future for volumes. We're very consistent with our expectations and what we actually can deliver, and our clients have come to really understand that and respect us and can rely on that. And I do think there are tremendous value to developing projects in the developing world. There's tech transfer, there's a host of co-benefits, and those are absolutely amazing projects. And I focused my whole PhD on that realm. But I will just say, from the standpoint of Anu, we've been very intentional. We've seen a lot of our competitors throughout the years expand globally, and have had a host of problems. So for that reason, I will just say that I think a green flag is that transparency, the ability to go to the project site, and for us, that has meant we are going to develop where we know we can control the rule of law, the boundaries, and make sure that the credits that we are selling are in fact going to be issued and delivered into the future, and we can control a number of factors around that. But that's not to say I think that the whole offset markets are built on this premise of lowest cost reductions and a host of co-benefits that go along. So I really kudos to all of my colleagues that develop internationally. It's incredibly complex. And when it's done well, it is absolutely incredible. But there are a host of factors that are outside of your control when you do so. So um,
Agree. If it's hard, then you are probably doing it right. So, yeah, thank you. Um, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Brendan, Lizzie, Lauren, for sharing your expertise and your resources and what you know and what you're still learning. Um, Anybody who wants to watch this webinar again, you'll get an email from our team so you can go back and catch all of the highlights. You can watch other webinars that we are hosting here at this website. And of course, please do take the survey that you'll get following this webinar so we can hear more about what you're most interested in, and how we can help you do the work some more. Special thanks to my teammate Julia on the back end who has kept everything moving so smoothly. I really appreciate you. And I wish everybody just a really lovely day. Thanks again for joining, and we'll catch you again here later. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Katie.
thank you.